Hi, I'm Ardella, and the day my husband died was the day I disappeared. He left behind $5 million, but not for me. His mother gave me a suitcase and a slur, told me to go live with the pigs. All I got was a shack they forgot existed, or pretended to. But inside that shack, I found something they'd spent years trying to bury. Not just lies, not just betrayal. Bones. Fire. My name. Forged in ink. Now tell me, if your whole life turned out to be a setup, would you walk away? Or would you dig up the grave they built for you? The lilies were already turning brown. I stood in the foyer of the Crestwood mansion, the scent of fading funeral flowers thick in the air. Someone had left the front door ajar, and the late summer heat drifted in like it owned the place, just like Marlene always had. My heels sank slightly into the Persian rug. I didn't move, couldn't. Conversations murmured behind me, cousins, uncles, people I hadn't seen in years and hoped never to see again. No one looked at me. They all stared at the mahogany casket we'd just lowered into the ground 3 hours ago. Douglas, 25 years of marriage, gone in a blink. And now the rest of it was about to go, too. The family lawyer, a thin, tired man named Harris, opened a manila envelope. He cleared his throat, not out of nervousness, but boredom. I could see it in the way he tapped his pen, impatient to get through the charade. "We are gathered to execute the last will and testament of Douglas Michael Vaughn." I braced myself. "To my mother, Marlene Vaughn Crestwood, I leave the family estate, all vehicles, business shares, and financial assets." I stopped breathing. "To my sister Diane and brother Miles, I leave equal portions of my investment portfolio, art collections, and travel properties." I blinked, waiting. "And to my wife, Ardella Vaughn, I leave the property located at Hollow Creek Cabin, including its contents and land." Silence. I didn't understand at first. My mind tried to rewrite what I heard. Surely there was a mistake. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. And then I saw her. Marlene. Her lips curled, a smirk so deliberate it sliced through the air. And I knew I'd just been cut out. Not just from the will, from the entire life I thought I'd built. My chest tightened, not with grief anymore, but with something uglier, something sharper. Harris closed the folder. "That's all, Mrs. Vaughn." Marlene's voice cut in like a whip. "No, that's Miss Vaughn now." A quiet chuckle from someone in the back. I turned my head, and people suddenly found great interest in the floor or their coffee cups. I gripped the side of the stair rail to steady myself. My legs felt hollow. "It must be a mistake," I whispered, more to myself than anyone. But it wasn't. Of course it wasn't. The movers had already arrived. Boxes, my boxes, were being lined up on the porch, labeled in blue marker. Someone had packed my life while I was still crying over a coffin. I stood there, watching it all unfold like a guest at my own eviction. My hands were shaking, but I refused to give them the pleasure of seeing me crumble. A memory bubbled up. Me, balancing the books for Doug's failing landscaping firm, staying up until 2 a.m. while he drank scotch and complained about taxes. All those nights I worked for nothing. All those years I thought I was building something with a man who, apparently, thought I was worth a crumbling shack by the woods. Hollow Creek Cabin. I hadn't heard that name in 20 years. Doug mentioned it once, said it was where his dad used to take the dogs hunting. It was more folklore than property. And now it was mine. I reached into my coat pocket, where I still kept my wedding ring. I hadn't worn it today. It felt wrong to pretend. I slipped it on for a second. It felt loose. Too loose. I looked down at it and whispered, "It never really fit, did it?" I slipped it back into my pocket. Outside, the sun was setting. The air was still thick and hot, but the light was fading fast. Marlene stood on the porch in a silk shawl, sipping lemonade as if she were the hostess of some summer garden party. When she saw me approaching, she reached down for my suitcase and tossed it. No ceremony, no pause, straight onto the gravel. The suitcase bounced once, then fell flat. She looked me dead in the eye. "Go live with the pigs, you pathetic leech." The words hit harder than the suitcase. I heard birds flutter from the roof. Someone behind me gasped. Maybe Diane. Maybe the mailman. Who knows? I didn't cry. Instead, I walked slowly over, picked up my suitcase, brushed the dust off, and walked toward my car. No one stopped me. No one said goodbye. I sat behind the wheel, my hands trembling as I gripped it. It was only then I noticed something taped inside the lid of my suitcase. A small envelope. I peeled it open with stiff fingers. Inside, a yellowing property deed and a brass key on a leather cord. The tag read, Hollow Creek Cabin. I stared at it for a long time. This was it. My inheritance. I started the engine. The tires crunched against the driveway as I pulled away from the mansion I'd spent most of my adult life inside. Not once did I look back. As I drove into the descending dusk, thunder rumbled somewhere behind the clouds. I turned the brass key over in my hand and said, not to anyone in particular, but just loud enough for myself to hear, "If this is all they think I'm worth, let's see what it's really worth." I drove for what felt like hours, even though the GPS said just under 90 minutes. The city lights faded behind me, swallowed by thick patches of pine and low-lying fog that clung to the road like a warning. The deeper I got into Hollow Creek, the more it felt like I was being swallowed whole. By the time I reached the property line, the last of the daylight had slipped away. Thunder rolled in the distance, not close enough to strike, but loud enough to rattle my chest. I eased the car onto the gravel drive, my headlights catching the shape of something that barely resembled a home. It looked like it had been forgotten by time, and by dignity. Vines strangled the wood slats like they were trying to pull the place back underground. The porch sagged on one side, the screen door hung crooked, and every window I could see was either cracked or clouded with dust and grief. I killed the engine, sat for a moment, then stepped out into the thick night air. It smelled like rain, and something older. The key Douglas left behind felt small in my hand. I fitted into the lock. The door creaked open with a reluctant groan. The air hit me first, wet, stale, and heavy with mold. I flipped on my phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, catching floating dust like tiny ghosts. "Okay," I muttered to myself, stepping in. "Let's see what a quarter-century of loyalty buys." The floor creaked beneath me, slow and long, like the house itself exhaled with my entrance. The first thing I noticed was silence. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that feels like something's waiting. I walked into what must have been the living room, faded floral couch, a cracked coffee table, and a fireplace with a crooked mantel. My light landed on a photo frame sitting right in the center. Douglas, maybe 12 years old. Marlene beside him, smiling like the devil in pearls. I stepped closer, confused. I'd never seen this photo. Doug always said he hated pictures, said they made him feel exposed. I reached for the frame, and as I picked it up, a corner of another photo slipped out from behind it. I gently pulled it free. This one was different. Douglas again, but older, mid-20s maybe, standing close beside a woman I didn't recognize. Blonde, smiling, her hand on his chest. I stood there a long time, not angry yet, just stuck. I whispered into the room, "You always said you hated photos." I set both pictures down and turned toward the kitchen, needing something, anything, to ground me. That's when I saw it. A small journal, almost buried in dust on the kitchen table. Leather-bound. Familiar. I opened it slowly. Receipts. Gas station stubs. land tax forms dated from the late 90s, and then, in his handwriting, definitely his, something that made the floor tilt under me. Transfer complete. She'll never know. I sat. I didn't cry. Instead, I listened to the rain start ticking against the roof, sharp and fast, like it had waited for me to find that line. I flipped back through the journal. Scribbles. Sketches. Nothing illegal, but enough to show me that Doug had started planning things long before I ever entered the picture. I put the journal down, stepped over to the stove, and was surprised when it clicked to life. The gas still worked. I found a dusty can of soup in the cupboard, beef barley, the kind he always hated, and heated it up. I ate in silence, watching the ceiling leak slowly into a bowl I'd placed beneath a drip. It was like the house was crying for me. Later, I wrapped myself in a blanket that smelled of mice and cedar and curled up on the wooden floor with my back to the wall. The echo of Marlene's voice repeated in my head like a scratched record. Go live with the pigs. I let out a bitter chuckle, not because it was funny, but because it was all I had. At least pigs don't lie, I muttered. The wind picked up outside. Something banged gently. Maybe the screen door. I tried to close the main door tighter, but the latch was busted. I gave it a few hard tugs before giving up. It stayed ajar, a few inches open to the night. Figures, I mumbled. Nothing here opens for me. I shoved an old chair in front of it. There was no real comfort in the space, but there was something still, something watchful. I turned off my flashlight, letting the dark settle around me like a second skin. I must have started to doze because the next sound I heard pulled me from sleep like a hook. Not thunder, not wind. Paper. Moving. I sat up fast. My phone light flicked back on, and I followed the sound. A whisper, really. Over to the far corner of the room. One of the floorboards had shifted. I got on my hands and knees and pried it up with a spoon I'd found earlier. Underneath, a letter. The paper was old, yellowed, folded carefully. My initials were written on the front. A.V. The handwriting, faint, uneven, but familiar. Too familiar. I held it in my hands, but I didn't open it. Not yet. My fingers wouldn't stop trembling. I climbed back to the blanket, letter resting on the nightstand. If you could call a milk crate with a cracked plate on top a nightstand. The house hummed around me, not from electricity, but something else. Something older. Something still breathing. I lay back and stared at the ceiling, the sound of distant thunder, just a murmur now. I whispered into the dark. What else did you hide from me, Douglas? By the time I stirred the next morning, the shack had already soaked into my bones. I hadn't meant to fall asleep on the floor, still wrapped in that moth-eaten blanket, but somewhere between the letter and the rain, exhaustion took me under. My body ached, my mouth tasted like old dust, and my hair was sticking to my forehead. I sat up slowly, the light now creeping through the slats in the blinds like fingers tracing over secrets. The letter from Ruth Vaughn still rested beside me, unopened, as if waiting for permission. I needed air and coffee. I boiled water on the gas stove, poured it over the last of the instant grounds I'd brought with me, and stepped outside barefoot, clutching the chipped mug between my hands. The ground was cool, muddy from the night storm. Somewhere in the distance, birds called out like they were checking to see who survived the night. And then I saw it. A dusty green pickup truck parked near the fence line. Someone stood beside it. Tall, broad, late 40s maybe, worn flannel shirt, work gloves in one hand, a long wooden plank in the other. He looked up from what he was doing, gave me a once-over, not rude, just measuring, and nodded. You the new owner of this dump? He asked, voice rough but not unfriendly. I smirked into my coffee. That's what they tell me. He set the plank down on the truck bed, wiped his hands on his jeans, and walked toward me. Name's Ray Haskins. I've been taking care of a few places out this way. I used to check in on this one too, couple times a year. I raised an eyebrow. You were hired to maintain this place? He nodded. Yup. Kept the roof from caving in. Trimmed back the trees so the power lines wouldn't get wrecked. That kind of thing. Was on Douglas's payroll till he stopped sending checks. I frowned. When did he stop? Ray reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a faded, folded receipt, and handed it to me. Douglas's signature. The date caught me off guard, 5 months before he died. 5 months ago, Douglas told me this cabin had been torn down, that it hadn't existed for years. Ray must have seen my face shift. Guess he was lying to someone, he said, casual as can be. That line hit harder than I expected. We stood there in silence a beat too long. Then he jerked his chin toward the roof. I've got some extra shingles in the truck. Mind if I patch that back corner? It won't hold if we get another storm. I hesitated. Pride flared. But the truth was, I had no idea how to fix anything here. I was already losing to mold and gravity. All right, I said softly. Thank you. Ray gave me a nod and got to work. No small talk. No questions. Just the rhythm of hammer and wood breaking the morning stillness. I watched him for a while, then went back inside. The place looked even sadder in the daylight. Shadows from broken blinds stretched long across the floor. I tied my hair back with a rubber band and started cleaning. I found a broom under the sink and swept dust into neat piles like it would make any difference. As I moved through the room, I came across an old wooden chest. The hinges groaned when I opened it. Inside, old books, a rusted lantern, cracked dishes, and beneath a faded towel, a pair of baby shoes, pale blue, soft leather, tied together with fraying ribbon. My breath caught in my throat. I had no children. Douglas said he didn't want any, claimed he wasn't made for fatherhood, that he'd been raised by wolves and didn't want to pass it on. I lifted the shoes gently, and that's when I saw the tag. To AV. One day. My initials. My name. And the handwriting. Delicate, almost feminine, not Douglas's. I sat down, still holding the shoes. My chest felt too tight to breathe. Who wrote this? When? Why were they here, buried under layers of things meant to be forgotten? The memory of the letter surfaced in my mind. I stood, shoes still in hand, and walked over to where I left it. My fingers trembled, but this time I opened it. The paper was yellowed, the ink slightly smudged. It was from Ruth Vaughn, Douglas's grandmother. Ardella, if you ever find this house, know that what's hidden here doesn't belong to them. It belongs to you. You were never meant to be erased. This land has blood in it, some of it yours, some of it theirs, but not all blood is family, and not all family deserves to keep what it stole. Do not trust Marlene. Do not trust what Douglas told you. You are not who they said you were. Find the rest. Before they do. My breath hitched. I read it again and again. Each time the words burned deeper. You are not who they said you were. I didn't even realize Ray had finished until I heard the truck door slam shut. I stepped outside, still in a daze. He waved from the driver's seat. I'll come back tomorrow with supplies. That front window's gonna fall in if I don't brace it. I nodded, unsure if I even said thank you. As his truck rumbled away down the gravel road, I walked back inside, the letter clutched in one hand, the baby shoes in the other. I tied the door shut with a rope I found in the shed. The latch was useless, and the wind was already picking up. I looked at the shoes again. What could possibly belong to me here? I whispered. Then, just as I turned toward the cot I'd dragged into the corner, the floor creaked beneath me. But not the usual groan of old wood. The sound was different. Hollow. I froze. Set the shoes down slowly. Dropped to my knees. I knocked once. Something echoed back. Faint, but solid. Metal. I pressed my ear closer to the floorboard, tapping once more. The sound came again. Dull, metallic, not part of the natural creak of old wood. I sat back on my heels, heart thudding, trying to steady my breath. A breeze drifted through the broken window, heavy with the smell of earth and the distant hum of cicadas. The floor in that corner looked no different than the rest. Worn boards, splinters curling at the edges, but something underneath was waiting. I grabbed the hammer Ray had left by the wall and gently pried at the edge of the plank. The nails resisted, old but still strong. Sweat dripped down my back. The wood gave with a groan, and I slid it aside. There it was, a small metal box, dusty, rusted at the corners, sturdy enough to have survived storms and secrets. Etched on the lid were 2 letters, R.V., Ruth Vaughn. I sat back, staring at it like it might vanish if I blinked. My fingers hovered, hesitant not from fear, but from the weight of what it might hold. "Ruth, what did you want me to find?" I whispered, not expecting an answer. The latch was stiff, but it opened with a snap. Inside, time sat folded in layers, photographs curled at the edges, yellowed documents, and a velvet pouch resting like a secret tucked deep inside a drawer. I pulled out the top photo and froze. It was a picnic, one of those hot, sticky Texas afternoons where everyone's trying not to sweat through their clothes. There was Douglas, younger, hair fuller, Marlene beside him, her lips curled into that practiced smile she used when cameras were pointed her way. And there I was, sitting on a blanket, holding a glass of lemonade. But my face had been blacked out. Ink, heavy and deliberate, not smudged in anger, but erased with precision. It wasn't recent. This wasn't some grief-fueled rage from after Douglas passed. Someone wanted me gone long before that funeral. My fingers shook as I flipped through more photos. All of them had me in them. All of them had been altered, my face gone, scratched out, removed like I never belonged. Underneath a folded page lined in faded ink. "Douglas may carry my name, but not my honor. If he ever betrays you, this is your proof." Ruth's handwriting. Sharp, purposeful, like she'd written it with her back straight and her jaw set. I reached for the documents beneath. Legal pages, tax receipts, bank ledgers, all tied together with a worn ribbon. I undid the knot and laid them out. Douglas's name was everywhere, so was mine. Except not in my handwriting. My name, my signature, had been forged, over and over, on property transfers, authorizations, even loan agreements. I'd spent years trusting him when he handed me papers and said, "Just sign this real quick." I never read them, never questioned. "For 25 years, I signed what he told me to sign," I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. I thought trust was love. Turns out, it was blindness. My thumb smudged a fingerprint into the corner of a page. It stayed there, dark against the faded paper. A mark that couldn't be wiped away. Just like this betrayal. The sound of tires crunching gravel snapped me out of my spiral. I shoved the papers back into the box, tossed the blanket over it just as the front door creaked open. "You shouldn't be digging around down there," Ray called out. He stood in the doorway, a new hammer slung over one shoulder and a bucket of nails in his free hand. I stood up, brushing my hands on my jeans, trying to keep my voice steady. "Morning," I said. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. "Brought some supplies. Figured I'd fix that front beam before it splits." I nodded. "Find anything worth fixing in this dump?" he asked, eyes narrowing just a little too long on the blanket behind me. "Only what your last employer left behind," I said, tone colder than I intended. We stood in silence. Ray didn't flinch, didn't smile. He just set the bucket down near the window and got to work, his hammer ringing out sharp and steady. But I felt it. He was watching me too. After a few minutes, he left the room without another word. I waited until the sound of hammering moved to the back porch before pulling the box out again. I untied the velvet pouch. Inside was a ring. Gold, heavy, The Crestwood family crest etched on the face, an ornate C wrapped in ivy. Inside the band, tiny letters read, "For the rightful heir." My breath hitched. "Heir?" I whispered, the word foreign on my tongue. The ring felt cool in my palm. I looked at the one already on my finger, the one Douglas gave me 25 years ago. It had always been a little loose, always twisted when I moved. I slipped it off. Then I slid the Crestwood ring on in its place. It fit perfectly. I stared at my hand like I didn't recognize it. For years, I tried to squeeze myself into their world, into their image of who I should be. But this ring didn't need squeezing. It had been made for me. I sat with that thought until the hammering stopped and Ray's truck pulled away. I reached for my phone, the idea hitting me like a jolt. Maybe I could call a lawyer, get ahead of whatever this was, prove I had something to fight with. But there was no signal, just a spinning wheel and a blank screen. I tossed the phone on the cot and stood, brushing off my jeans. Then I heard it, the sound of a car door slamming. I froze, peered through the crack in the blinds. A black SUV sat at the end of the driveway, dust still settling around its tires. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Marlene. Hair perfect, suit crisp, lips painted just right for confrontation. She stood for a moment, looking straight at the cabin, then she smiled. "Oh, sweetheart," she called, her voice dripping with venom disguised as honey. "Did you really think we wouldn't find you here?" My hand closed around the edge of the box. She was here, and she wasn't alone. I rose to my feet slowly, heart thudding, not in fear this time, but in the kind of readiness you feel before a confrontation you've rehearsed in your head a dozen times. Through the cracked glass, I saw Marlene step from the SUV, her heels crunching against gravel. She looked like she belonged on the steps of a courthouse, not a rotting cabin on the edge of nowhere. I opened the door just wide enough to let the light between us. "Ardella," she said, her voice too sweet for the heat. "I see you've made yourself comfortable in my mother's old dump." I didn't flinch. Her name was Ruth, right? Funny, she left this place to me. For a breath, her smile cracked. Without waiting for an invitation, she brushed past me, trailing perfume and entitlement. Her eyes swept the room like she was appraising a crime scene. "I honestly thought you'd be long gone by now. My son gave you everything. We even let you keep that little cottage out of charity." I closed the door behind her. He gave me silence. But Ruth? She gave me answers. That stopped her. Her eyes narrowed. Not confusion, but calculation. "What answers?" she asked. I said nothing. Just let my gaze drift to the loose board beneath the chair. Her eyes followed. Her lips twitched. "It's funny," I said. "The second you stop fearing what they can take, they start to squirm." Marlene's tone softened, turning maternal in that false, sickly way I knew too well. "I know grief can cloud the mind. I've seen it before. You're alone out here, and it's making you imagine things. Let me help you sell this place. You'll get something out of it, at least." "Sell it?" I laughed once, no humor in it. "You mean, take it back?" That landed like a slap. Her smile vanished. I walked past her, crouched by the blanket, and pulled the metal box halfway into view. "You might want your lawyer to review some of Ruth's records. Turns out she had a very different idea of who deserved what." Her face paled just for a second, but the mask snapped back into place. "You don't know what you're playing with." "No," I said, standing tall. "But I'm learning fast." She backed toward the door, heels digging into the wood as if trying not to trip. But she had to have the last word. "Careful, Ardella. Curiosity has killed more than cats in this family." She was gone before I could reply. The engine roared, and her SUV disappeared in a plume of dust. I sank into the old chair. My knees didn't shake until she was out of sight. I didn't cry. There was no room left for that. Just a quiet, measured voice in my head. She's scared. That means I'm close. The ring on my finger glinted in a sunbeam sneaking through the broken slats. Ruth's ring. The one that fit like it had waited its whole life for me. The silence in the cabin was thick, but not empty, and I reached for the cup of tea I hadn't finished earlier and sat back, letting the quiet settle around me like armor. Then came the buzz. I turned toward the counter. My phone lit up. An unknown number. A text. "Stop digging, or I'll bury what's left of you too." I didn't move, just stared at the words. No name, no emoji, no tone to decipher. I looked out the cracked window at the gravel road where Marlene's SUV had vanished. Then I whispered, steady as stone, "Then I guess we're both digging." That line sat heavy in my chest as I drove through the sleeping streets of Hollow Creek. The radio buzzed static. I didn't bother turning it off. I was too wired to sleep, too tired to think, and too far past the point of pretending this would all go away on its own. The courthouse stood like an aging sentinel, stoic and hollow at this hour. I parked just outside, the diner next door casting a flickering neon open sign onto my windshield. I hadn't eaten in over a day, but the gnawing in my gut wasn't hunger. It was something colder. Inside, the lobby lights were dim. A single clerk sat behind the counter, tapping at a keyboard with the kind of boredom that comes from a quiet town with too many secrets. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'm looking for land records. Hollow Creek. Anything pre-1995. He didn't even try to hide the look. That's basement stuff. Last door down the hall." The basement smelled like moldy carpet and forgotten arguments. My flashlight cast long shadows across rusted filing cabinets. It didn't take long to find a ledger labeled Vaughn Holdings. The name made my hands pause before touching the cover. Inside, yellowing pages listed decades of transactions. Names I recognized, some I didn't. Then I saw it. My name. Neatly typed, followed by a scrawled signature I'd never written. A deed transfer. Land moving from me to Douglas and Marlene. Joint ownership. I'd never signed this. I'd never even seen it. "Looks like someone did you dirty," the clerk muttered from behind me. I hadn't heard him come down. I didn't answer. I just folded the paper and slipped it into my purse, keeping my voice calm. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. Done in my name. Outside, the air had turned to mist. Rain started softly and then came down hard, rattling the diner windows as I walked in. I ordered black coffee and sat by the window, the paper burning in my bag like a brand. Across the street, the same black SUV sat under a dead street lamp. Lights off, engine humming. The waitress set the cup in front of me just as my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Go home. You don't want to find what's buried there." I looked up. The SUV's brake lights blinked once, then the car slid down the street and disappeared around the corner. They weren't hiding anymore. "You're right," I whispered. "I don't want to, but I will." What choice did I have? Go back to silence? Let them erase me like they erased that photo? No. They'd already buried me once. I was just the ghost come back to haunt them. I found a payphone outside the diner and called Ray. No small talk. "You said you worked for Douglas. Did he ever bring paperwork to the courthouse?" There was a pause. Then, once, long time ago, he had Marlene with him. Said they were cleaning up some inheritance mess. I laughed, dry and bitter. That mess was me. Another pause. This time longer. Then Ray said quietly, "You're not safe, Ardella." "I know." I got back to the shack near midnight. The storm had passed, but left the world wet and heavy. I tried to shut the broken door again, the one that always bounced back open like it was mocking me. This time, I grabbed a plank from the porch and nailed it across. "This door stays shut until I open it," I said aloud, not to keep them out, but to remind myself I didn't belong to them anymore. Inside, I lit a candle and spread the documents on the floor. Some were bank slips, others faded copies of legal letters. I was halfway through flipping a deed when I noticed something almost invisible on the back corner. A watermark, Crestwood Legal Trust. I turned the page over. The signature wasn't Douglas's. It was Ray Haskins. I sat there, staring. The man I'd let into my home, the one who said he just wanted to fix a roof. He was in on it. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just sat still, letting the anger settle into something solid. Then I said it, more to the night than anyone else. "Everyone in this town is lying." The words echoed in my head long after the fire died to embers. By dawn, the candle had burned out, and the documents lay across the table like corpses under thin sheets. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The sound of knocking came just after sunrise. 3 soft taps, polite, almost casual. I froze, glancing toward the door I'd nailed shut. Another knock. Then a familiar voice. "Morning," Ray said. His tone was easy, like he hadn't forged a single thing in his life. "You awake? Brought coffee." I hesitated before pulling the board loose and opening the door halfway. He stood there with that worn smile, one hand holding 2 paper cups, the other shoved in his jacket pocket. The air smelled of sawdust and bitter roast. "You didn't sleep, did you?" he asked, eyes darting past me into the cabin. "Not much," I said, stepping aside. "I was reading." His eyes followed my gesture, the table covered in papers, and one page in particular resting on top. His signature. He froze for a fraction of a second. Then the smile came back, tighter this time. "Well," he said, "looks like you've been busy." "Yeah," I said quietly. "You recognize that name at the bottom?" He didn't move closer, but his jaw shifted. "I signed a lot of things for Douglas back then. Maintenance bills, tax forms." "Forgery doesn't count as maintenance," I said flatly. The room went still. Even the cicadas outside seemed to pause. Ray's face changed. A flash of guilt, then something colder. "You don't understand, Ardella," he said finally, voice low. "You were never supposed to see any of this." That single sentence confirmed everything I feared. I wanted to collapse, scream, break something. Instead, I pulled out a chair and sat down. My tone stayed calm. "Then sit," I said. "Let's talk about why." He blinked, caught off guard by my composure. Slowly, he sat across from me, setting the coffee cups on the table like peace offerings. "Douglas was in trouble," he began. "Marlene bailed him out more times than you could imagine. When the debts got too deep, she made him move everything into her name, called it protecting the family legacy." "And you?" I asked. "What did you protect, Ray?" He looked away. "My job. My neck. You think anyone goes up against the Crestwoods and lives easy? I was supposed to process documents, not question what was on them." "So you kept quiet," I said. He nodded once. "Yeah, I did." There was no anger left in my voice, just truth. "And you helped them erase me." He opened his mouth, then stopped. There was nothing left to defend. I leaned forward. "Then maybe it's time someone didn't stay quiet." He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. "You're playing with fire." "Good," I said. "Let it burn." The silence after that was heavy, but different. The kind that comes when 2 people know exactly where they stand. He stood, rubbed his hand over his face, and started toward the door. "They'll come for you before this is over," he said. "Then I hope they knock." He didn't smile this time. He just left. For a moment I stood there, listening to his truck start and fade down the road. That's when I noticed the small silver USB drive sitting near my coffee cup. I hadn't seen him set it down. It wasn't labeled. I plugged it into the old laptop Douglas used for his fishing logs. The screen flickered, then loaded a single folder. Crestwood Holdings, hidden accounts. Inside were hundreds of files, payments, transfers, shell corporations, offshore accounts. Money moved quietly, in and out of names I recognized. Douglas, Marlene, even Ray's. I sat back, staring at the glowing screen. Every lie, every manipulation, documented in numbers and dates. "All those years," I whispered. "I thought I was the quiet one. Turns out, they were the ones making noise to hide the truth." I began typing. Notes, dates, cross-references. A paper trail of my own. One they couldn't erase. My ring caught the light from the window. Ruth's ring, the one that fit perfectly. I twisted it once, feeling the weight of it anchor me to something steady. The phone buzzed. I didn't want to look, but I did. Another text. "Stop, or someone gets hurt." I stared at the message, the cursor blinking on the laptop screen beside it. Then I typed back with hands that didn't shake. "Then you should have thought of that before killing him." The silence afterward was deafening. Then, from outside, I heard it. The crunch of tires on gravel. Headlights swept across the wall. I whispered, "They found me." The cabin lights flickered just as the sound of tires grinding on gravel grew louder. My heart pounded, but I didn't freeze. Not this time. I grabbed the metal box and the USB, shoved them into my satchel, and slipped out the back door into the trees. The rain had just started, soft at first, like someone whispering a warning. I didn't need to hear it twice. Branches slapped at my arms as I ran through the woods, flashlight beam dancing across tree trunks and muddy ground. My breath came sharp and quick. Behind me, footsteps. Not running. Walking. Confident. Hunting. "You can't win this, Ardella," a man's voice barked through the darkness. I ducked behind an old oak, hugging the satchel to my chest. My fingers gripped the rough bark while my mind focused. I remembered how I used to beg Douglas not to bring work drama home. How I stayed quiet when Marlene stared through me at family dinners. I used to think survival meant silence. Not anymore. Footsteps stopped. A second voice echoed, familiar and sharp. "Give me the box," Marlene called out, "and I'll let you walk away. That's more mercy than you deserve." I stepped out from behind the tree slowly, the rain now steady, soaking my shirt and hair. Gerald stood beside her, younger than Douglas, but with the same hollow stare. "You had mercy buried with your son," I said. My voice didn't shake. Marlene's smile was thin, venom under veneer. "You don't understand what that evidence can do. You'll destroy the family name." I tightened my grip on the box. "You already did that." She moved faster than I expected, lunging forward. We grappled. Her nails clawed at my wrist as she tried to rip the satchel away. We stumbled onto the old cabin deck, slick with rain. A crack, then a snap beneath us. The rotting wood gave way. I fell sideways, catching myself on the edge. Marlene hit the floor hard, her scream muffled by the thunder above. Gerald stepped back, panicked. Under the broken deck boards, in the exposed foundation, something shimmered. Ash, blackened paper, and the glint of charred bone fragments. My breath caught. The box slipped from my hand and rolled near the edge. I looked at Marlene, who was staring into the pit like it might swallow her whole. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice nearly gone. She didn't answer, but Gerald did. His voice broke. "He wasn't supposed to die that night. Mom. She just wanted him quiet." I stepped back, soaked to the skin, cold in a way that had nothing to do with the rain. The truth wasn't a stab. It was a slow burn, spreading through every lie I'd swallowed for 25 years. "You killed him," I said. "Because he was going to tell." Marlene got to her feet, trembling. "You're bluffing," she hissed. "This is nothing. No one will believe you." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. "Maybe you should check your email." Confusion flickered across her face. "Before I left the diner," I said, "I sent everything. The USB contents, the old will, the property transfers, all of it, straight to a journalist I used to babysit. She's been waiting for this story her whole life." She took a step toward me. "You don't know what you've done." "Yes, I do," I said, just as the first red and blue lights blinked through the trees. Headlights, sirens, a deputy's voice shouting in the distance. Marlene dropped to her knees as 2 cruisers pulled into the clearing. The soaked box lay open beside her, its contents spilling into the mud. Gerald backed away, hands raised. I didn't run. I didn't speak. An officer approached and gently took the box from the mud. Another snapped cuffs on Marlene's wrists. She shrieked something about defamation, about lies, about betrayal. I whispered, "You wanted to bury the truth. Now you can dig for your own name." I stood there as the rain came harder, washing everything, ash, blood, memories, into the earth. They led Marlene past me. She didn't look at me. I think deep down, she knew. Ruth had chosen me for a reason. I stared down at my hand, the ring that never fit, Ruth's heirloom, now gleaming with rain. I slipped it off and placed it in the mud next to the shattered box. It didn't belong to me anymore. I turned back toward the shack. The door, the one I once couldn't close, was swinging wide open in the wind. "For 25 years, I whispered. I begged them to let me in. I should have just built my own door." From the trees behind me, Ray appeared, drenched and quiet. He watched the cruisers disappear into the night, then met my eyes. "You did it," he said. "No," I replied softly, watching the cabin glow in the lightning. "She did. Ruth did." We stood together in the clearing, not speaking, just watching the last of the lights fade down the dirt road. As dawn broke, pale and silent, I walked toward the shack one last time, no longer a guest, no longer a wife forgotten, but a woman with her own key. As I stepped over the threshold, the floor creaked beneath my feet like it had something to say. The storm had passed, but the cabin still carried the scent of damp wood and old smoke. I set the kettle on the stove, more out of habit than thirst, and lit the burner. The hiss of the flame was the only sound besides the faint chirp of birds breaking through the hush of morning. The table that once held ashes, forged deeds, and grief now sat cleared, wiped clean with my own hands just hours before. It felt strange, sitting there without fear in my chest. My fingers traced the edge of a notepad, the pen already waiting. No lawyers, no threats, just paper and ink and silence. "For 25 years, I murmured. I wrote things other people told me to write, checks, thank you cards, condolences they didn't mean." I lifted the pen. "This one's for me." The letter wasn't long. It didn't need to be. "Dear Ruth, I didn't understand when you left this place to me. At the time, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe you meant to leave it to someone else, someone blood-related, someone whose name carried more weight than mine. But now I know. You knew what was hidden here. You knew what they were capable of. You didn't just leave me a cabin. You left me a key to a truth no one else had the courage to name. You gave me the only thing no one else could, myself." Tears came, not the kind that choke or break you, but the kind that clear your vision. I let them fall, the way rain cleans a roof after too many dry seasons. The fire in the stove snapped softly as the kettle began to warm. I folded the letter and tucked it between the pages of Ruth's old recipe book, the one with handwritten notes and oil stains from decades ago. I stood and looked toward the door. The plank I'd nailed shut the night before was gone, likely swept away in the storm. The door now swung gently with the breeze, not resisting, not holding back. Barefoot, I stepped outside. The ground was still wet, cool beneath my soles, but solid. Steam lifted from the earth in ribbons. Sunlight filtered through the trees and kissed my skin for the first time in what felt like years. "Sometimes," I whispered, "the things that fall apart were never meant to be fixed. They're meant to set you free." A familiar rumble stirred in the distance, then tires crunched on the gravel. Ray's truck pulled into view. He stepped out slowly, holding a thick manila envelope. "Report came in this morning," he said, voice low. "Ruth's will. It holds up. No contest. You're the legal owner now." I didn't smile, not right away. I took the envelope and walked back to the shack. My hand brushed the siding, rough and cracked in places, but real, honest in its imperfection. "I guess I finally came home," I said. Ray nodded, then turned without another word, leaving me in the quiet I'd earned. Inside, I gathered the remnants of the life I used to beg for, Douglas's old letters, Marlene's scrawled notes, those cruelly doctored documents, and placed them in a metal bin by the door. I struck a match, held it a second too long, then dropped it in. The flame caught slow. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't roar. It just burned, clean and sure. I stepped back. The ring I'd tossed into the mud the night before was gone, washed away by the rain. I didn't look for it. It had served its purpose. "For so long," I said, "I thought that ring meant I belonged. But belonging isn't something you're handed. It's something you claim." The fire burned out on its own. Later, I locked the cabin, my cabin, from the outside. I took the long road down to town as the sun climbed behind me, its warmth at my back like a hand I didn't need to fear anymore. Weeks passed. I found part-time work at the local library, helping folks dig through old property records, probate files, birth certificates. It wasn't much, but it felt honest. It felt right. One afternoon, a woman about my age walked in, folder clutched to her chest like a shield. "They told me I didn't have a chance," she said, eyes brimming. "But I heard about what you did." I smiled, gently. "Then let's start with the truth. I used to think I'd been left with nothing. But I was wrong. I'd been left with everything that mattered.